Trent Franks has represented Arizona's 8th Congressional District since 2003. He serves on the Armed Services and Judiciary Committees, and he's the chair of the Constitution and Civil Justice Subcommittee. Welcome, Representative Trent Franks.
Thank you, Mallory. It's always a pleasure to be with you, sir.
Thank you. Let's get right into it. Missile defense. You've been outspoken about missile defense. There are countless reasons why we are not having greater support for missile defense, as well as a whole series of reasons why we should. Let's get into some of those.
Well, there's no question that the missile threat is a growing one, not a diminishing one, and yet ever since I've been in Congress, I've watched just a great debate take place with the left over missile defense in general, but it's starting to be where we're winning that debate. But unfortunately, this administration every year has underfunded the Missile Defense Agency, and we've had to try to plus it up in the Strategic Forces Committee, and we've done that, and it's just a vital situation. You know, the missile threat is, as I say, it's increasing, and you know, all through the ages, whether we were fighting with spears or guns or whatever, there's always been a first an offensive measure and then a defensive measure to counter that.
Can missile defense help us, protect us, I should say, from some of the threats and challenges that are facing us? I
believe it's vital because, you know, a nuclear missile landing in your backyard can ruin your whole day, as they say. And the ability to be able to interdict that if it occurs is important. And we have a limited missile defense capability, but it is something that is vital. We don't hit bullets with bullets. We hit a dot on the side of a bullet with a bullet now on technologies that really go beyond what most people think we have.
So what's the administration's position on
Well, I think this administration thinks that somehow missile defense is destabilizing, and I've never understood that.
Wait a second. Missile defense is destabilizing?
Somehow that we would have a capability that some of our opponents might not have, that somehow it makes us more adventuresome. And that's just
a defensive capability.
It's a strictly defensive capability. Our GBIs do not explode. They're just simply a hit-to-kill technology. But the ability for us to defend against either an errant or rogue missile, I think, is extremely important to our country.
There's been much recent coverage of the U.S. Electric grid and its vulnerability to electromagnetic pulses, EMPs, and the geomagnetic disturbances, GMDs. This coverage includes articles that have appeared in the front page of the Wall Street Journal, LA Times, as well as we featured it here at Fox in just the past week or two. As you're chairman of the Congressional EMP Caucus, can you tell us why we have such vulnerability in this area and what we can do to change that?
Well, we've sort of engineered ourselves into our own vulnerability. We've become sort of the victims of our own sophistication. For years, for decades, we've hardened our military, certain critical defense assets against EMP. In fact, we've spent what would be ultimately now probably into the billions of dollars hardening our nuclear triad, our missile defense capability, because we know that EMP is a reality in nuclear exchange, or anytime nuclear warheads detonate, they create some type of EMP. If it's high in the atmosphere, high altitude, then it can create something that's more far-reaching and more dangerous. But at the same time, our grid is completely unprotected, and the military counts on that grid, that civilian grid, for 99% of its electricity needs, and if they shouldn't have it in CONUS, it could compromise their military mission. So it's a vitally important thing to address. We're doing that. We have both the SHIELD Act and what we call SIPA, the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act, in Congress. And I think that the latter is going to go forward quite soon now, and I hope that the SHIELD Act at some point follows.
What will these two acts, if passed and signed by the President, what will they do?
Well, SIPA primarily insinuates the whole residual or the remedial effort for an EMP into our national security response mechanisms, our homeland response mechanisms. Now, that's not as preventative as I'd like for it to be, whereas SHIELD calls for a national standard to be able to say we want the grid to be able to withstand this many kilovolts per meter of EMP, and we want to use hardware-based solutions so that we don't have to count on human error in order to protect our grid.
Congressman Franks, let's get right down to it. Who's against these bills?
Well, I would suggest to you that people who don't understand them are the primary ones against them.
Like? Could you name a few names?
Well, I probably won't name any of the congressional names, but the truth is that we're gaining every day. There was a GRID Act that passed the House unanimously here a few years ago, and unfortunately it had some of the cybersecurity provisions in it that the Senate disagreed with, and that's why it stopped in the Senate. But I've got a lot more hope this time. The truth is, we just simply have to say that if we're going to be a group that protects our national security first and foremost, the Congress has that as its prime responsibility, then we need to consider all threats. And this is a rather an asymmetric threat that I think an enemy could potentially exploit in the worst kind of way.
Are there a lot of Dems against this?
No, you know, I think that the Democrats understand this fairly well. The one thing that's probably different about them is that more Democrats are willing to regulate than Republicans are. And I'm very reticent to regulate any industry. But when it comes to national security, we have to do what's necessary to protect our country.
Who will stop these two acts from being passed, if they are stopped?
Actually, I think SIPA, the Critical Infrastructure Act, will become law. That's my opinion.
But you said SHIELD might not.
I think eventually SHIELD will become law, but right now it's stuck in the Energy and Commerce Committee, and I'm hoping that as time goes along, it'll gain the support to come through that committee.
I'm going to try one more time.
Yeah.
Who's stopping it? Without even a name, who?
Right now, the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee doesn't feel like it has the sufficient support to let it to come forward and have a markup in the committee.
Why not?
We have difference of opinion on that. I think that's something you'd have to address to him. There's no attempt on my part to make anyone look bad. I just want to see the right thing done, and I hope that at some point he will come to the same conclusion.
Congressman Franks, you have enormous experience on Iran. You were the first to refer Iran to the United Nations Security Council 8 years ago. Based on your experience on Iran's nuclear ambitions, what conditions should be included in a nuclear deal with Iran?
Well, just for the record, I think we were the first office to call for Iran to be referred to the Security Council 8 years ago. I didn't do that as a person. We did that, But the
it was your office.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. But the point is that the whole ball game here.
You keep your health care plan until you can't. I mean,
sure.
I won't play. It was you basically.
Yes, sir. Well, the whole ball game here is uranium enrichment or plutonium production. And there are a lot of things that can be in that agreement that will be either superfluous or not as critical. But unfortunately, the President's interim agreement right now allows Iran to go forward with their uranium enrichment, and that's essentially the whole ball game. And at some point, I believe that they will be able to continue their quest to be able to produce plutonium. Without being able to produce plutonium or enrich uranium, they cannot build a nuclear weapons capability unless they buy that material from someone else, which is always a danger. But unfortunately, this is the track we're on, and I can't tell you, I don't know of anything more inexpressibly dangerous to the peace and security of the entire human family than a country like Iran, with their present government, having access or a nuclear weapons capability.
What specifically should we do with Iran?
We should make it very clear, given their statements about wiping Israel off the map and certainly bringing America to its knees. We have to, for the sake of defending world peace and the peace and security of the United States of America, we have to do whatever is necessary to prevent Iran from gaining that capability. And we have to make it clear. I think there are only two things that stop Iran from doing it. We've sanctioned North Korea, for example, into starvation for nearly half a century, and they've tested 3 times. So while the sanctions, I support them, and I think it's outrageous that the President has backed off on those sanctions. The reality is, I think only 2 things ultimately stops Iran from gaining that capability. That is either a direct military intervention or the conviction in their minds that absolutely will occur if they continue to pursue a nuclear weapons capability. It's my judgment the best way to stay out of war with Iran is to make it clear to them that we are willing to do what's necessary, militarily or otherwise, to prevent that capability. If there's any ambiguity there, I think it will lead us ultimately into some type of conflict.
Congressman Franks, why do you think Obama's interim deal with Iran will fail? Can't Congress do anything about this to pressure the Obama administration, at least pressure their policies toward Iran to do the right thing?
Well, I mean, offices like mine are trying to do that. Before that agreement came down, we introduced the U.S.-Iran Nuclear Negotiations Act that had in it all of the tenets that would have prevented Iran from being able to gain that capability, but that act was not voted on, and unfortunately now, if it passed, this President has stated very clearly that he would veto the bill. I have to say to you, I don't try to examine the President's motivations, but I am here to tell you that if his policies prevail here, my children and yours could very easily walk in the shadow of nuclear terrorism in this world. And it's something that I just feel like somehow we have to do everything possible now to make sure that that doesn't happen. We'll need a new calendar if Iran gets nuclear weapons. It will change geopolitical equation that much.
In this next election coming up, there's going to be a large focus on Obamacare.
Yes.
I don't think you're going to see a large focus on foreign policy.
No,
do you think there should be? And how do we actually focus on foreign policy to get those people out there concerned enough to really vote the right way?
Yeah. Well, I truly believe that there are three critically important areas that we have to prevail upon to make sure that this country goes forward and survives as we know it to be. We have to have free enterprise and free markets to be able to have an economic system to sustain our military or whatever else we need. We have to have constitutional foundations in this government. But ultimately, everything that we do is predicated upon having a secure environment. And that means national security has to be at the top of the list of the federal government's agenda. And even when we're arguing over things like Obamacare, which, I'm in violent disagreement with, we have to make sure that we're doing what's necessary not to take our eye off of the national security ball, as it were. Because if we fail there, it doesn't matter where else we succeed. I think Obamacare is going to fail. I think that it will be probably the central theme, or maybe Exhibit A would be a better way to say it, of what socialism can do to a free country. And I hope that people wake up in time that we're able to go in a better, different direction, a more market-based direction that empowers people rather than forces a government system down their throat.
Congressman Franks, if the President called you up today and said, give me one piece of advice, one thing to do, what would you tell him?
I'd say, Mr. President, take your eye off the politics and do what's right for the next generation. I know it's been said many times, but real statesmanship looks not to the next election, but to the next generation. And if we do what's right by making sure that our children can walk in the sunlight of freedom as you and I have, if we do what's right to make sure that this country's free market base that's made it the most productive nation in the history of humanity is intact, and if we do what's right to hold on to this Constitution that Daniel Webster talked about the criticality of holding on to, then I think that there's a future for my 5-year-old twins, and I think there's a future for your daughters. If we fail to do that, we fail the test of our time. And Mr. President, I know we disagree on just about everything, but God help us to look what's best for the country and for the next generation, rather than arguing over some of these new ideas that have been proven over history not to work.
Congressman Trent Franks from Arizona's 8th, thank you so much for being here with me today, and I look forward to having you again.
Well, thank you, Mallory. It's always a pleasure, sir. You're one of those guys that I hold to be a statesman.
Thank you.